is on how businesses can implement the idea of inclusion through the widely accepted slogan of the SDG framework, Leave No One Behind. Please allow me to introduce and welcome to the dais the panelists for the session. May I invite Mr. Ashish Kumar Singh, Principal Secretary, Transports and Ports, Government of Maharashtra. Ms. Rajni Bakshi, Mumbai-based freelance journalist and author. Dr. Anand, Health Advisor, Chief Minister of Maharashtra. Mr. Bittu Sahgal, Founder, Journalist and Filmmaker, Sanctuary Asia Magazine. Dr. Nandita, Shah, Co-Director and Managing Trustee, Akshara, Mumbai. To moderate the session, may I invite my Executive Director, Ms. Jashodhara Dasgupta.
Thank you, Radhika. And I hope friends will get their food and settle down. So, as citizens of this beautiful and bountiful planet, which each of us has the privilege to occupy for a few decades, I think we've realized, as Dan pointed out in the first session, that action must be accelerated if we are to leave behind a habitable world for our next generation. And that realization, as we all know, has sparked the collective thinking and many mutual promises in 2015, in which not just governments, but also other important stakeholders like civil society and businesses have joined hands. So following the first panel, and I'm very pleased now to anchor a conversation today among some of these key stakeholders, including from civil society, from the media, and from government. And the topic of our discussion really is, how can businesses implement the idea behind the Sustainable Development Goals of leave no one behind, which perhaps in translation we could say, how could we conduct our businesses in a way that shows that every human life is valuable, and how can we work together in innovative partnerships towards this goal? So I'm delighted to welcome my co-panelists to this conversation. Really pleased to have all of you here. So let me start first with you, I think, Rajni. And Rajni, I just wonder if you would like to flag some of your own recent efforts and writings that highlight the agenda of leave no one behind. And would you also like to comment on whether it has relevance and value to the work of our friends from the business sector?
Thank you so much. Firstly, thank you for inviting me. Well, I'm generally the bad cop in most situations, so I will proceed to play that role today also. See, my central preoccupation has been with the question, inclusion into what? I have 5 minutes. So the first way of looking at that is that we want to include people into the existing business paradigm with a little bit better ecological management. That's one possibility. But the other possibility is that when we say inclusion, we are looking for a paradigm shift which creates new power structures. And the current situation actually is we're not doing too well on either of them. So with due apologies to our colleagues in the previous panel, I don't share their optimism, and here is why. See, if this conversation had happened 25 years ago, it would have been fine. But we are now we're almost 30 years away from the Earth Summit, the Rio Earth Summit. And from the time when it was officially recognized by the governments of the world that development, as the concept emerged after the Second World War, is not a sustainable thing. It's destroying the planet. And since then, truly a lot of remarkable work has been done by the corporates. And the idea that business has a central role to play has been also around for at least 30 years. I don't know how many of you know that American businesses played a big role in dissolving apartheid in South Africa. because over the 1980s, the whole field of socially responsible investing emerged, and that led to boycotts by large corporations of the South African economy, which played eventually a big role in ending apartheid. So there have been truly important successes. More importantly, there was the development of the triple bottom line concept by the late 1990s. By 2006, the United Nations had set up the principles of responsible investing. But I'm sorry to say that after all of this, today, actually, as a planet, we are not only not better off, we are substantially worse off. The overshoot day, am I saying that right, Bittu? Yeah. Earth, are you all familiar with the concept of Earth overshoot day? Anybody here who, just a random check. Anybody is not familiar with the concept? Okay, it was October in 1992 when we adopted the principle of sustainable development. It is now mid-August. That means by every year, by mid-August, we have exhausted our annual quota of resources on this planet. And in spite of many substantial innovations, I'll give you just two. Interface is a large modular carpet making company that set a goal of zero, footprint in 1995, and they are not going to meet their whole goal, but they have made substantial progress. Right here in India, Infosys, a global company, already has 43% of its energy coming from renewable sources. Now, what was the logic behind these kinds of innovations? What was the expectation? The expectation was that this would have a ripple effect, that it would have a copycat effect. That's not happening. It's not happening either on the scale or the speed at which it should happen. And one large reason for it is that too much of the wasteful, toxic kind of stuff that passes in the name of industry is still not criminalized. It is still legal. As one lady, I mean, Amy Dominy is sort of considered the founding mom of, the socially responsible investing movement. And this is 10 years ago, she said to me, she said, I still feel like a failure because Exxon is still in business. It ought to have gone out of business. So, in a nutshell, what I'm saying is that if we are serious about the SDGs, we have to accept that some businesses will simply have to cease to exist. They will have to go out of business. Otherwise, there is not much hope. Now, I'll give you one, and why the SDGs actually themselves are a problem. Because they are based on the assumption that we can move the chairs on the Titanic and prevent it from sinking. Okay, that's actually what it amounts to. That if we somehow, move the weight around, the ship won't sink. And here's why. If you look at the handbook of the UNEP, the United Nations Environmental Program, has brought out a handbook on the SDG, I think it is SDG 12, which is sustainable, I have it here somewhere, sustainable consumption and production. It has a beautiful picture of an Indian, I think Assamese elderly woman spinning a thread on a charkha. Okay, and she's sitting on the floor on a mat. You can see in the background of the picture handloom fabrics. Now, if you look at her carefully, she is actually already complying with some of the key SDGs. Number one, it's handloom, thread and weaving are one of the oldest forms of sustainable production and consumption. SDG 11, which is inclusive, safe, resilient and sustainable human settlement. She probably lives in one that qualifies for all of this. SDG 9, which is resilient infrastructure. If you today, I don't know how many of you have seen the Meghalaya film on the living bridges of Meghalaya. Okay, I won't go into details. I'm already using up my 5 minutes. And SDG 8, decent work. But you know that she would count as undeveloped and backward within the SDG framework. So unless we are willing to reconsider what we think development is, And I'll tell you why she is called undeveloped. Because SDG 8 is not just decent work. It is decent work and economic growth. And this, I submit to you, is the central reason why we are losing the battle, and we are losing it at an accelerating pace. Because we are not, neither as companies nor as nations, are we able to shift to a paradigm that is based on sufficiency and self-restraint. Instead, we are still governed by a market system that believes, and an economics, a discipline of economics. The brightest people in the world are being brought out of universities where they are being told that there is only one model of economics, and that is one which depends on perpetual and perennial growth. And if that is not going to change, then not only are the SDGs not meetable, but I'm afraid all the wonderful work that the Infosys and the Mahindras and the interfaces of the world continue to do, and there will be brilliant innovations at a micro level, but they will still amount to moving the chairs on the Titanic. Thank you.
Thank you, Rajni. I think you've really given out a clarion call about how can we look at an economy of sufficiency and self-restraint without losing our economic edge. And I'm going to move to you, Bittu, because I know that you've been working for many decades through your magazine, your journalism, your filmmaking, and I think you've been trying to also bring out some of these questions. And what has been your experience of working on these issues, especially on the Leave No One Behind agenda? And how have you been able to add value to corporate thinking, for instance?
Well, it's a wide subject. It's impossible to cover, but there are some truths that are self-evident. And amongst those self-evident truths is that the economy is a wholly owned subsidiary of the environment. It's not the other way around. That is a fundamental mistake that is being made. It's being made in Harvard, it's being made at business schools in India. If that is not accepted, then all the solutions amount to Band-Aid on an amputated arm. It's not going to work. I don't think that we should be passing judgments so quick. You are bad, I am good, he is good, she is good, because that's not going to help. I think that Sanctuary, the magazine that we started 40 years ago, and it's now a foundation, we've got like a tripod. There are 3 legs on which we stand. It's biodiversity, economics, and climate change. And climate change is the spoiler. As far as biodiversity is concerned and climate change, they are like your teeth and your gums. You cannot think of one without the other. The issue now is that when biodiversity becomes recognized by big business, small business, as nothing other than raw material, then suddenly it changes. It's like considering your child to be nothing other than meat. And it doesn't work. It basically doesn't work. So now we are in the grip of a situation where we live on a magical planet. Actually, you guys are a little too old for me. My constituency is 12 years old. So if I may revert back to 12 years old. So this is what I tell them. Just look at this wonderful planet we live on. You know, you climb up a tree, you break something from there, you eat it, you shit it out or you spit it out, a new tree comes up and it pops up, and the world has been going like this for the last 3 billion years. Perfect. Children understand it like that. But the moment we go beyond, I think, puberty and then we get up there, something happens to our brains and we believe that it's possible to consume endlessly. And the truth of the matter is that we never had the technology. We never had the technology to overwhelm the systems of the planet, even during the Second World War. But since then, we do have that. We are seeing now dead oceans. It's not a question of whether plastic is good or a chemical is good or something like this. The truth of the matter is it's all around us. We are a bubble, a small bubble that surrounds this planet. We may imagine that everything that we have done has come from some magic of our minds. It hasn't. We're just bumped up monkeys. And if we can accept that we are bumped up monkeys and imbibe a touch of humility, the fact is that nature is conspiring to give us life. The intelligence that we have been gifted with, it could actually change everything for everybody and every species on this planet, but somehow or the other, this intelligence that we've been gifted with has been gifted to us without the experience on how to use it. It's like giving a child a 747 and saying, fly this now. You can put it on autopilot for a while. I don't think that there's a whole lot really to be said because there's nothing new. If you look at humans today, Mesopotamia, 11,000 years ago, we invented agriculture. Before that, we were hunter-gatherers. And it just occurs to me that, look, what is it that is worrying everybody here today? Forget about what happened in Bhopal. Forget about that for a minute. It happened. Everybody, including Union Carbide, wishes it never happened. But look, if you take the problems that have taken place today in Syria, it was not a Shia-Sunni problem. It wasn't. It was a resource deprivation problem. If you take India today, believe me, what you see that has happened in the Middle East, what we've seen, what happened in Syria, is a teddy bear's picnic compared to what is likely to happen in India if we continue with business as usual, imagining that the planet is some kind of Aladdin's lamp that will continue to produce irrespective of anything. So here's the deal. I don't want to be a bearer of bad news, but India is in harm's way. We are in harm's way. There are too many of us on a sinking Titanic, and there is too much weaponry around the world right now. You will not be able to go into Trump's America and take resources from there. It will be the other way around. Apart from that, take two examples. One is the Sundarbans, and the other is Marathwada. If you take these two parts of India, Sundarbans is a sinking ship. We have got the largest number of people ever that will see a migration on the planet is about to take place. It has started taking place in the Sundarbans. Simple. Somebody raises the sea levels over there. The winds come a little stronger. These people have built bunds. Their salinity is destroying their kidneys. You've got resource deprivation at one end, and you've got on the other side us. We're having a party. Now this is incendiary. It is not in the interest of the captain of a ship to have 95% of the ship starving while 5% of, and this is not communist and capitalist. It's plain, simple, good sense. The planet is nothing but a ship. It's got limited resources. It's a magical ship. Huh? Now let me revert back to my 9-year-olds. It's a magical ship. You eat something, it comes back again to life. You go to sleep, it comes back again to life. But not if you overwhelm it, not if you punch holes into it. And that, I believe that the people in this room, you have the intellect to actually change the circumstance. You have a self-repairing machine called the biosphere, which can actually change everything and make sure every single human being on earth has enough to eat and happiness to boot. But this iniquity that we have foisted upon ourselves is not something that has anything to do with justice. It has everything to do with survival. It is not in our self-interest, whether it is Trump's America or whether it is Modi's India or whether it is some island country somewhere which is going to get overwhelmed with a meter of sea level rise. If I was Martin Luther King, what I would say right now is not I have a dream, I have a nightmare. You know, and the pity of it all is I don't need to have that nightmare because the earth is self-repairing. All the things that we talk of, sustainable development goals, all those things, they're true. But not if you overwhelm your liver. I like single malts, but I can't have 17 of them in an evening and then go into 23 and 25, and that's unfortunately what's happening with our development ambitions right now. And each one of us is lecturing the other person about what they should do instead of fixing what we should do. And I think at the end of the day, if I may revert back to my 9-year-olds, what I tell them is that you're living in a magic world. It fixes itself. It's like you break an apple from a tree and another one comes up. But if you cut the tree down, nothing happens. It's as simple as that. The 8-year-olds, 7-year-olds understand it, but when they get to be 45 and 50, something happens in the synapses. Okay, I run an institution called Kids for Tigers. We have 1 million children in India, and we tell them a very simple story. You can't save the tiger if you don't save the forest. When you save the forest, you're actually saving millions of species in the name of that tiger. In the process of saving that forest, you're saving virtually every land-based water resource that you can think of. Even the Himalaya pours down from there. And in the process of doing this, the most wonderful thing happens. Whether you're a monkey or a human being, if you shit out a seed, a new tree comes up. When the new tree comes up, it pulls carbon down. It's in balance. Now, we tell the children this because I have no right, irrespective of the truths I know, to overwhelm a child with a truth that is going to break that child's spirit and say, it's going to go down the tubes in any case, why should I do anything? It's for the people in this room to wake up and smell the coffee. I have more to say, but I don't think I shall. I will just end by saying that at this particular point in time, there are two ends of India. I'm speaking about India specifically, which are going to take our Titanic down. One, we are building huge amounts of dams in the Himalaya when the glaciers have melted. It's like buying a Ferrari when there's no fuel. The second is that when you go down to the Sundarbans, the migration that is already taking place, is going to overwhelm this country to the point where Bangladesh and India are not going to be able to cope with the migration that we are foisting on them, whether it is Trump who's raising the sea level or whether it's India that's doing it from deforestation, it doesn't matter. So here we are in this room, very intelligent people. We believe that we have become the gods that we've invented, and I think nature's got harsher lessons for us, but the good news is, pretend you're 7-year-olds and I'm talking to you, nature can fix itself. All you have to do is stop hurting it. It's such a simple thing. If you want me to present you a development goal, that's what I'm saying. Just sit back, relax, wait for the tree to grow back.
Thank you, Bittu. So we're all relaxing and waiting for the regeneration. Today seems to be an afternoon of ours. We heard about rage, religion, and regulation in the earlier panel, and how some of those need to be harnessed in order to bring about, that kind of jolt that really needs to make a change. So talking from the point of regulation, and then people have been talking about the Titanic, so there is a captain on the ship, and that is really the state. So I'm going to actually ask a question of our two friends here who are representing different aspects of the functioning of the state. So what are your thoughts around I would just first go to, I think, Mr. Singh. What are your thoughts around this issue of regulation? And why is it that even though, as we have been hearing since the afternoon, there are examples and companies have innovated, businesses have taken up, leadership roles, somehow we've not been able to actually halt the juggernaut that Bittu is eloquently warning us about. So Mr. Singh, would you like to just speak to the role of the government? And maybe we can pass in the mic. Thank you.
I want to begin today's afternoon conversation with the 101 economics stuff, wherein they say that you regulate when there is a market failure, and you also regulate when you know that you can fix it. Unfortunately, when there is a market failure, there is tremendous demand for regulation, and you tend to regulate even if you're not able to fix it. So regulation, predominantly in India, has followed this kind of history. And it has, therefore, instead of impacting all the time behavior, societal behavior to achieve ends that we intended to achieve through that regulation, has many times done just the opposite. However, I would like to go back to some other goals which have not been discussed, which government actually tends to kind of be extremely bothered about. and which also determines the outcomes of various elections that you see, which determine what government we all get. And that is about poverty, education, and health. I would, of course, Anand is a very old friend's son who happens to now be interning with the Chief Minister's office. And I was, many years ago when he was a kid, I was the collector in the district in which his dad works in Gadchiroli. But let me tell you that coming with all that background of having worked as Chief Executive Officer of the Jilla Parishad in Gadchiroli, having worked as the collector in the same district, having worked in various parts of India otherwise, and having been on the streets of Mumbai, poverty is something which impacts governments and impacts all of us rather very quickly. If you see on the streets of Mumbai, you would see lots of children actually begging for a penny. I mean, a penny is a big sum of money if it is a UK penny, but an Indian penny is what they're begging for. And many a times we often say that we should not promote beggary, so many of us really don't intend to put our hands in our pocket and pull out anything. But imagine a child of that age, what more can that child be doing? I mean, in the heat of Delhi, in summer, the child is begging on the crossroads. In the winters of Delhi, the child is begging on the crossroads with almost no clothes on his body. And in the rains, the child is begging. Now, most of us who have children understand that there is nothing harder to work for than what these kids are doing. Now, when you have to deal with this kind of challenge on the one side, then sustainability of the types which Bittu is talking takes a backseat. You start thinking in terms of what is it that we need to do to deal with this challenge. And there is where economic growth comes and kicks in. And you start thinking that, okay, if this kid doesn't survive today, there's no point in talking of sustainability 100 years from now. If this woman who is getting raped day in and day out on the street doesn't survive today, there's no point in talking about sustainability 100 years from now. And so corporates as well as governments need to apply our minds today, particularly in countries like India, Bangladesh, Nepal, etc., as to how is it that we are going to deal with this problem, failing which all other issues would remain only issues of fashion, issues of, topics which could be discussed in very nice drawing rooms and very nice halls like this, but they will definitely not impact government behavior. They will also not impact the public at large, and therefore they will continue to feel that the sustainable development goals are basically meant for the elite, and they are only talking of their own sustainability. It's not about the sustainability of, it's not my sustainability which is getting impacted today, this moment, this point in time. Now, some of the solutions that we have found out have also not worked. They've been regulatory sometimes, and they have been very developmental at times. Now, let me tell you that in education, initially it was felt that if we could build classrooms, and if we could provide midday meals, subsequently, then we would be able to attract a lot of children to schools. We actually set up targets to build rooms, and we also set up midday meal program, which is, to some extent successful. May not be as good as it ought to have been, but at least it reaches a very large number of children in the country. But what we did not understand is that there was no point in bringing a kid to a room where you could not actually impart anything interesting enough or anything substantial or anything of consequence. In fact, by bringing the kid to a room where you do not have a qualified teacher to teach, you are stunting the growth of the child, because the child would have learnt a lot more climbing trees, eating mangoes, and perhaps producing more trees, which the child is not able to do because the child is forced to sit in this room and do some kind of rote learning job. And after about 10 years, as Bittu said, at the age of 8 and 9, the child is still one with nature, but by the time the child has come out of this 2-room school, the child has nothing much left inside other than the fact that the child is failing most of the times. And so we start creating lots of failures at a very early age in India, because many of us have failed in our own ways, but failing in class 2, class 3, class 4, class 7 is a very big failure to overcome, particularly in a small society like a village. And these are some of the sustainability challenges that government needs to address, and therefore corporates need to apply their minds, because this is what constitutes the biggest challenge for countries like India. Electric vehicles, they may come, they may not, doesn't matter, because what we need today for Indian mobility is maybe pedestrian pathways, maybe cycling tracks, but definitely not wider roads for electric cars. Even though I'm not saying that that's not important, because research on electric cars might actually bring about something so exciting that mobility itself will change. And since this is not a conference on mobility, I don't intend to kind of take you on that course. But I can tell you that what we need today is to address some of these very urgent needs where sustainability of a human being is impacted now and at this moment. And if that is not addressed, then we are not there, or at least they are not there with us to stand by our thoughts and ideas for tomorrow and day after and 50 years from now. The same challenge we have with health as well. In health, we do not measure outcomes in terms of how healthy you have been. We only deal with it in terms of how do you tackle a particular disease. So earlier we created structures like the public health centers, which were supposed to actually be interventions wherein people could remain healthy. They were supposed to intervene at a time when you were still healthy and you wouldn't fall sick. But today, the entire health infrastructure is created to deal with issues where you fall sick and therefore you come to a doctor, you pay money, you get better. But no one is actually looking at preventive medicine. No one is looking at preventive interventions. So these are some of the challenges that I think regulation will have to address. And regulation, as I would always want all of you to understand, comes out of the elections that we have every year. I mean, every 5 years. And nowadays, it's actually almost every year. Some state or the other is always going to elections. And in a democratic setup, the governments that we give to ourselves finally decide what kind of regulation, what kind of policy framework you would finally end up getting. We very often tend to kind of brush it under the carpet, believing, do I have a minute? Half a minute? Yeah, half a minute. We tend to kind of brush it under the carpet, feeling that no, we are not concerned with them, it doesn't impact us. But actually, that's where the entire impact comes about. And policy making or regulation is about not impacting directly, but changing behaviors of the citizens to ensure that they impact things differently. So an innovator can innovate, a health service provider can provide better health service, and education service provider can provide better quality education, and so on. It is not about you yourself going and providing stuff. So regulation is about changing this behavior in a way in which society would like it to, and that is where I think we all need to put our heads together, corporates, citizens, various kinds of social entrepreneurs, and civil society, to come together and see how we can actually partner and make this understanding reach everyone, so that we start actually dealing with the first 3-4 goals which matter the most for India, and then move on to next ones, because they are of course important, but maybe they'll be taken care of in time. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Singh. I think you have taken a different position, and I hear you also say that, you know, when India has urgent problems like poverty to solve, then it's okay to go in for a growth model.
I didn't say it's okay. I only said that there's no
other option.
I mean, governments have to deal with that.
Governments have to deal with that. Okay. So this is a kind of different position from what we've been hearing so far, and I'm sure there'll be many responses and questions to that. But I'm also coming to your other, the point that you made, which is that the biggest challenges in this country are actually the first few SDGs, and our partnerships should actually work on those SDGs. And for now, we can keep aside the issues around the later SDGs, which are actually about production, consumption, industry, trade, and economics growth. So with that, I'm just going to come to Nandita, because I know Nandita has been working for a very long time on women's rights issues, including women's rights within the world of work. So Nandita, do you agree to what Mr. Singh is saying in terms of actually creating a sort of divide in the way that we are looking at the SDG goals? What would be your take on this in the context of the conversation today?
I think I don't think Mr. Singh would also agree with what he's saying about, having a hierarchy of goals. I think each of the goal is interrelated with each. We can't talk about the production not connected to poverty. So in a way, there is no SDG which is really not interconnected. And I think that the kind of hierarchy that we need to really work out as a government priority may be different. For the business houses, the priority may be different. But I think that that kind of hierarchy is not going to work, because we cannot have a model to deal with poverty unless we really also look at sustainability. Because in the long run, we are going to talk about it. Today, businesses cannot not think about poverty, because who's going to buy your products? See, today's businesses have to look at consumers, finally, and the consumers are not going to exist if you don't have the kind of structure you want to do. So I think that there is a total interconnectedness, but for us, especially people who are working on gender, we are talking about at least 49 to 51% of the world, and it's not just number 5 of the SDG that's relevant, it's actually cutting across. Like if you look at poverty, the majority of poverty is actually women who are bearing the brunt of that poverty, both as women-headed household and also people who are surviving and supporting the families. So when we start talking at each of the level, this kind of, like the problem that we have is you just put gender equality as one part in SDG 5, while actually it cuts across. And for us, the challenge is, how do we look at gender equality in the corporate sector? What is the way we are looking at it? And what is the contribution that is made by the corporate world in gender equality outside? And I keep feeling, and that's what the question that we were raising, is that it's still very much within the framework of what is my larger marketing strategy and how does this gender equality or sustainably fit within that. And it's only that much that I'm willing to take. And unless we are willing to push that envelope, to take that envelope forward and to say we need to bring a certain another kind of challenge. Like I'm just giving an example. Say for example, something like Procter & Gamble. They have done huge amount of work around challenging sexual division of labor through their ad that they've done. The question that I'm asking is P&G willing to take that conversation within its workplace? Is it possible to talk about what's the kind of policy that this would mean? Can we say that why should there be childcare center where 30 women are working? It should be childcare center where 30 people are working, because they're fathers also, right? So fathers have a responsibility to look after their child as much as mothers have. Is it possible for a corporate to start thinking of everything that it stands for? What does it mean in terms of its workforce, and what does it mean outside? And I think unless we are able to bring some of these conversations within our workplace, and like I'm just taking the the R's conversation forward, like the ILO has come up with 5 R's that are required for women to get integrated. Do we even recognize the unpaid, as a corporate? Do we recognize that we are working and getting the workforce that we need in our company because somebody else is putting in the unpaid care work outside of it? Is that even part of the way we calculate our GDP? Is there a way in which a country can look at GDP by incorporating unpaid labor? Today, there's a huge study that's done about what's the cost of domestic violence in physical GDP terms. What is the cost of it? What is the cost of unpaid labor right now? Promondo has come up with a huge study in USA. Can we bring some of these conversations when we are talking about our commitment to gender equality? And I think that is a gap that I feel that a lot of times we are willing to do something out. So like as Akshara, when we are working with young people, we have no problem corporate supporting us on education. We say we want young girls to be supported for education, no problem. You start saying we're talking about domestic violence, or we are talking about we want to do something on street sexual harassment. We want to start talking about issues of, why is it that gender division of labor has to exist in this way? Corporates don't want to take the complex issue, and they don't want to take the risk of upsetting their people. Now, how are we going to talk about gender equality if you're not willing to challenge and upset and push the envelope? So that is something that, yeah? No, but even if it's measurable stuff, I think that these are measurable in, say for example, when we are saying, and I just want to give example, that when we are talking about the urbanization thing, and the current thing that we are talking about, we had to work for 4 years with MCGM to ensure that when we are doing urban planning of Mumbai city, it should be gender inclusive, right? Now, it is something that should be part of our discussion. How do we provide for a certain kind of services? You have a vision of a city of Mumbai where there are no care centers. How can there be care centers? If without care centers, how do women get to work? So that is, I'm talking about the practical part of women's role. But the second part is, what is the strategic way in which we are going to change the gender inequality that exists in our society? And both of these, in a way, are measurable if we apply our mind and apply to challenge and change this. And that is the commitment that I think we need from the government, and also we need from the corporates, because there is this very limited way in which we are willing to engage in some of these issues.
Thank you, Nandita, and thank you for raising the question of women and work. So while we've been hearing about the importance of growth in order to reduce poverty in India, what kind of growth is it, and what kind of economic development models comprise that graph of growth? And if we look at India, for instance, as Nandita has been pointing out, owing to the lack of gender-inclusive planning, both in the corporate workspace or other workspaces and also on the streets, in the way the city is laid out, perhaps we have been unable to raise the participation of women in the formal paid workforce. And so 95% of women who are working in India today are in the informal workforce, where they operate without any labor laws or any other kinds of social security benefits. So I think we have to also question the way the growth model works, and how does that model actually address poverty. And I think with that, I'm going to come to our other panelist here, Dr. Bang, who is also, in a sense, working within a government setup at the office of the Chief Minister. And I'd like to ask him, the SDG framework was declared in 2015, and it strongly underlined the idea of inclusive development, growth which leaves no one behind. And have you noticed any kind of impact on the functioning of the government since this declaration, or any way that this has affected their engagement with the business sector? Is there anything you'd like to highlight?
I think Ashish ji was making a very pragmatic point about sustainable development goals. And he took a great example of preventive care. Dr. D.A. Henderson, the Dean of Hopkins, was the chief of the global smallpox eradication program. And we achieved smallpox eradication globally, one of the greatest victory of mankind ever. Dr. D.A. Henderson told us in a class, no one has ever thanked me for not having smallpox. So preventive care, or the word sustainability, is seen as such a distant goal. And in India especially, a land of 1.2 billion cricket and political commentators, a land of platitudes, opinions and feelings, it is all immaterial unless we actually develop the methods to implement those. Now I am not, and I must clarify this, especially in the political charged India of today, that I am neither a defender, nor an apologist, nor the trumpeter for the government. I am purely an optimist trying to make incremental change. Now with respect to government, what we realize that where the problem begins, maybe the first issue is incomprehension leads to suspicion. And what is this government as a monolithic entity which may lead to suspicion? So the first approach, of course, is to have dialogue between the government, which is represented by the political leadership, the bureaucratic, then the of course civil society and the corporate. So two examples, and we started formally sending sumoto communication from the Chief Minister to CEOs and actually of companies as well as civil society organization. Literally addressing, dear Mr. Tata, I am delighted to know that the Tata Trust wishes to work on mental health care program in such as an hospital and district. I fully welcome you, and we, the government of Maharashtra, will be delighted to work with you. I think that shows humility and openness to open the floodgates and work. Second, we actually, in one of the program on water conservation in Marathwada, you said Bittu, exactly for water conservation in Marathwada, we had a program and the dais was very interesting. In the center was the Chief Minister. On his right side was Amit Chandra, the managing partner of Bain Capital India, a corporate titan. On the left side was Amir Khan. Around the 90-minute session, majority of the conversation was done by these two with several of the CEOs and philanthropists in Bombay city, and the Chief Minister, which might be unusual for a political leader, spoke only for 8 minutes. So dialogue involving those with whom the comfort level and trust can also be engaged. So that was the first important part. The second method being explored is allow flexibility. Do not impose solutions from the either side, and allow flexibility in terms of geography, in terms of theme, and in terms of nature of the solution, and even open certain sensitive areas which may be considered the sacrosanct of the government. For example, the Azim Premji Philanthropic Initiative is working on legal aid for the under-trial prisoners in Maharashtra, who are actually 70% of the inmates in all the prisons in Maharashtra. So again, this security and openness that yes, we are open to engage with the civil society and philanthropists to solve the problem. Number 3, as we all know, financing is one of the biggest issue with respect to any partnership. Now interesting 3 models emerge. One was co-financing. The water conservation model has an interesting financing model. It has government financing the diesel, the philanthropist financing the machine rent, JCB Pokland, to distilled water body or create water structure, and the community providing the bullock carts or other rent for carting the silt. So all 3 partners coming together, actually creating a model which is not just PPP, it is PPPP, People, Public, Private Partnership. The second option was what we did in case of Ola and Uber, is that a special fund the government created, the skill development department as well as the social justice and tribal development, to fund the skilling of tribal and scheduled caste youth as driver, and not only that, provide funding and connect them for loans for purchasing the vehicle. And finally, going ahead, actually involving the MCX and now possibly NCDEX, through which cotton farmer can actually, a soybean farmer can engage in trading. So involve different methods of financing of engaging our partners. The next important aspect, and in my at least limited understanding of especially health, and I won't really expand beyond that, we sometimes have a myth in India that we have phenomenal policies, only poor execution. At least in health, we have many a time such terrible policies that it will be a miracle only if we have great execution. So the idea is, let us open the floodgates for thinking engagement as well. How do you do that? This, for example, entire program of water body desilting was developed by a task force which had people like Amit Chandra and Vivek Sawan actually developing, working with the Secretary of the Water Resources Development. So wonderful matching of minds to develop program. Going ahead, again the challenge is we do not have only programs on paper, so set up technical support unit or program management unit to actually translate the program into action. So I would say these are some of the avenues that one is trying to do. This doesn't solve the problem fully. We of course have, as Nandan Nilekani quotes, the 3 laws of evasion, which is, this is not needed, this is already being done, this is role of some other department or individual. So how we solve this and actually find a solution remains an issue, but my hope is combining the 3 uniqueness of the 3 sectors. Government, interestingly, has unique credibility. I would remember Ashish ji mentioned he was collector of Gadchuli district, and when I was a young child, he had come for the camp full of tribal youth. And the tribal youth, when he was the collector, was introduced to the tribal youth. The tribal youth got up, one by one came forward and physically touched him, saying that, oh, we did not know the collector is also human. So the credibility of the state and the nature of the state in our remote parts especially still remains. To that, if you add the passion of social sector and innovation of the private sector, I think that is the ideal combination, which partly we are trying to do. Again, the dream is the sustainable development goals will not be achieved unless we have the, it is now fashion in India, but the 4F model, which one may call it. It is the decentralization of facts, function, functionary, and funds. Unless all these four are actually decentralization, then only we will have the SDG actually possibly translating into India and Maharashtra specifically.
Thank you. I think, Dr. Bang, you've kind of segued the conversation into the notion of dialogue and partnership, co-production of solutions, and flexible contextual approaches. And that really brings me to my last question to this panel, which I'm just throwing it open to all of you, because the theme of this conversation today is really to look at partnerships as a very critical component of the SDGs. So partnerships in a very real sense, in which there is an equal engagement, in which there is equal dignity of both, equal status given to both inputs, or the multiple partners' inputs, and also a co-production of a solution which is actually acceptable in a very real way, apart from being sustainable and inclusive. So I would just like to ask all my very interesting panelists here, what do you think would be your suggestions in terms of building an enabling environment for businesses to integrate the SDGs framework into their practice? And I'm using the word practice advisedly here. We are not talking about CSR, we are not talking about branding. But we're talking about the practice of businesses, what the main function that they perform. And what do you think would be ways in which, because all of you are part of the ecosystem within which businesses operate, the government, the civil society, the media, what do you think would be some ways going forward from here? So very, very brief thoughts, if any of you would like to add. Yeah. Rajni.
Because I want to use this opportunity to respond to your point about children. I am also a trustee of CRY. So I will share some observations in my capacity as a child rights advocate. So there are broadly three reasons why children end up on the street. The first one is cultural, which is that they run away from abuse and violence in the home. That can be addressed through many of the programmatic kind of innovations that have been discussed, and many more, which we don't have time for. But the bigger reason, the much more numerous, what adds numbers, is that they are the children of parents who have also come with them to the city, who are economic and environmental refugees. Now, for this, businesses can do two things. They can do many, I'll just mention two. One is stop displacing people. The bulk of our poor who come to the cities are either economically displaced, in that whatever livelihood they had, which at least was enough to keep body and soul together, has fallen apart. Or some industrial or development project has dishoused them, displaced them, and they have not been given adequate rehabilitation and resettlement. Please note that the last people who came to the streets of Bombay protesting against the Sardar Sarovar Dam were never members of the activist group that opposed the dam. They had always agreed to resettlement, and 12 years later they were still without full rehabilitation. So business can play a big role in that, and at the moment, by and large, though there are some exemplary cases of good work, but by and large business is failing, and it is responsible for displacement. And on the Similarly, on the nutrition issue, the reason why children are not getting a proper education is not only because sometimes they don't have a teacher. We have a huge cognitive impairment problem in this country because the nutrition from 0 to 5 gets sadly neglected. And you will be shocked to know that in the current phase of at least the last 5 years, social spending on children has declined. If we were to spend even a fraction of what has been ruined, what has been frittered away as our non-performing assets, a tiny fraction of that, if it were to be deployed in these PPPP kind of, schemes, we could, within 5 years, we could change that reality. And that kind of partnership of money, skills, commitment, and innovation would ensure that in children from tomorrow, the child born will be sure not to have cognitive impairment due to vitamin deficiency.
Thank you, Rajni. I think you've substantially challenged everyone in this room. And I wonder if any other panelists would like to take up my question around partnerships.
So I would partly extrapolate the experience in civil society sector and then propose some questions or parameters. The first is, how is the solution designed? Is it like, is it sometimes, Dr. Taylor, the man who wrote the Alma Ata Declaration of Health for All, used to say that public health experts are like children who have a lock in their key and then who have a key in their hand and trying to find the lock. It should be the other way around. First understand the lock and then design the key. So how are our solutions actually designed? By keeping the problem and understanding that. The second is this innovation part. This innovation word, and can we have innovation without AI, blockchain, smartphone and app? The entire innovation seems to be surrounding these 4 terms, and an innovation which possibly is also not cow urine curing cancer, or that Lord Shankar was the first plastic surgeon. If that kind of innovation truly can prosper, would be the second key role. The third, I would say, the only PPP model, public-private partnership, is it leading to capitalization of profit and socialization of the risk, which is taking that model into disrepute, especially in the social sector services? That would be the third parameter. The fourth would be of the urgency, that how urgently we are thinking of the solution. There is a beautiful poem, Sahara is creeping southwards and southwards. As we know, the Sahara desert, because of deforestation, Sahara is creeping southwards and southwards, relentlessly but slowly, Sahara is creeping southwards. Don't laugh, O fools in the north, the earth is round. Right now when we are speaking, there is a mutant parasite emerging in Gadchiroli district, leading to a kind of malaria, which I will almost have vicarious pleasure when it leads to epidemic in South Bombay and possibly even Nagpur. Because we, as Khalil Gibran said, for the fall of one leaf, the entire tree has given silent consent. So we to be sensitive and to have urgency about problems happening in the remotest part is the fourth criteria, which I will essentially apply to finding the solutions and partnerships.
Thank you, Abhay. I think that's quite important in terms of who is designing the solutions. So, Nandita?
I think that I'm just taking what Dr. Anand said forward, that in partnership, from the civil society perspective, Akshara has done a lot of work with government and even to some extent with corporate. We are finding constantly that we are not seen as an equal partner. Even in government, there's a lot of suspicion with civil society. There is a lot of, it's not engagement as an equal. I mean, we are not talking about equal in terms of scale, in terms of what, but in terms of ideating, in terms of bringing innovation, in terms of bringing the concerns on the table. There is a hesitation, and how do we overcome that? And even in terms of challenges of institutionalizing processes. And I think that's a challenge that we are facing as women's rights organization, that you work together, but institutionally there is always a fear that you will be a critical voice and just leave you out of monitoring, leave you out of any institutional process. You can help us as long as you are okay. How do we overcome that fear? And I think that's a challenge. The second thing that I want to bring into the whole discussion is what is happening to future of work and how are corporates looking at incorporating people into work. The whole challenge of livelihood that we are facing everywhere in the world, but also in our countries, and now when we get into AI and other places, we are not really looking at the challenges of future of work. And our concern is that when future of work gets reduced, women will be completely out of work. And how do we really talk about engaging women in the new kind of jobs that are going to emerge? The third area is that when we are talking about what is the role that this kind of partnership of PPP can play in creating a kind of facilitating infrastructure for urban processes, because now today we are talking about almost next few years, by 2030, majority of India is going to be urbanized. How do we look at creating the kind of infrastructure which takes care of, care that is to be seen by everybody? So not just childcare, senior citizen care. There's so many aspects that are completely, in a way, missed out when we are discussing the social protection that's required. And I feel that we need to really create convening platforms, and it need not only be from the Chief Minister office, but how can we create a convening platform where different voices are genuinely heard, and it's not like, we are just accommodating. A lot of times PPP also have, accommodating voices, but convenient voices. How do we genuinely allow a convening space of dissent, convening space for dialogue, so that we can actually come up with a more long-lasting solution? And I think that is something that we really need to look at. And even I feel the whole idea of representation, I'm not talking about reservation for women in parliament, but the whole idea of representation of marginalized voices of different kind of thing, and complex voices, like where are LGBT voices in any of our spaces? Where are transgendered voices in any of our spaces? Where are sex workers' voices in any of our dialogue? These are all people that, like when we say no one to be left behind, they are part of it. But we don't want to bring all these uncomfortable questions and, muddy the water. So how do we really bring that kind of, process of creating spaces where muddied waters are part of the way which actually we will dwell into the situation?
Thanks, Nandita. I think you're bringing up the whole question about platforms, but when we bring in other voices, are we talking only of their presence or also of their influence? Because you can have access and you can have presence, but you may not have any influence on how the decisions are finally being made. So I think for all of us here in this room, these are questions as we go into thinking of partnerships. I'm wondering if Mr. Singh or Bittu would have any last thoughts, maybe just for a minute each.
I would only like to say that as citizens, we need to get back to some first principles. We need to get our hearts in the right places. I was Collector Gadchiroli, and the first day that I took charge, I was on national television for having been held responsible for the high mortality rate. They were showing me as if I was that big villain who was sitting there doing nothing for children, and that was my first day in the job. And there onwards, no one ever visited that place. Even the so-called activists, they come there, they kind of shoot the place for a couple of hours, and then they are very scared of getting into any place which is, even mildly dangerous sounding. In fact, the place which Anand referred to is one of the very, very, difficult places to get to, and that's why they had never seen a collector, and they thought that, collector is not a human being. But I'm just trying to tell you that we need to get our hearts in the right places, and once all of us, once again, make it fashionable to actually deal with these real issues as if they were our own issues, lots of things would change. All these partnerships would automatically fall in place. Today, most of it looks very competitive. It looks like you just want to kind of take some of my space, or take some of my limelight, or occupy some of my my nicer side of my job, and therefore there is this competitive people are not willing to accommodate. But I can guarantee you that if you really have your heart in the right place, the government, every one of us would automatically kind of come around and try and do stuff. But unfortunately, I have this feeling that after the independence movement, we have somewhere lost that passion for the right kind of stuff. And that is what will build partnerships amongst all of us as citizens, not necessarily as divided corporates, governments, entrepreneurs, or civil society.
So what you're saying is passion for partnerships. Okay. So passion being but passion being the key ingredient. But passion has to come with that equality and acceptance. So I'm wondering, Bittu, if you want to have a last word, being a very passionate person for many decades.
I don't know about last word because there is no such thing called the last word, but the truth is that we all are, in a sense, development addicts, and addiction needs de-addiction. We don't know what happiness is. We chase dreams, and in the process of chasing those dreams, our self-esteem tells us we are wonderful people, but we crush others. And the secret of life per se, it becomes borderline philosophy. The secret of life is to live and let live. And we as a species, we are so dominating this planet. We believe that we have become the gods that we have invented. And I can see around me today, I work with children. Actually, this is you guys are too old for me. We're colonizing them. We're colonizing their water, we're colonizing their air. And I think that it's time for some of us to sit back and do a little thinking about our self-esteem. This is a self-repairing planet. It can repair itself, but if you have had too much to drink, the first thing the doctor tells you, stop drinking, your liver will repair itself. But after a point, that regeneration will not take place, and we are at that point. Please believe me, on the biosphere, we are at that point. Our endocrine systems are shot to hell. There are too many chemicals in our... It's not all bad news. The thing is that I work with kids, and I have no right to go to children and tell them, the world is coming to an end. What I tell them on the other hand is, who over here has got a cut on his hand? Oh yeah, do you see how it repairs? The planet repairs itself the same way. Hope is medicine. And those who steal hope are actually damaging more than just our psyches. They are damaging the economy, they are damaging happiness. And I think that we need to take a touch of humility, in all of us. We may be bumped up monkeys. But when I talk to kids, what I tell them, and my constituency, actually the average age is 12 and below. You guys are a little old for me. I just tell them everything will be all right, Nature has a way of fixing things, but not if we completely destroy the biosphere. We need to make kids understand that they are living in the womb of mother. It can be fixed, it will be fixed, it has been fixed, but there is a certain arrogance, and that arrogance comes with economies and growth as being the objective. It's all we need to do. We could live in a perpetual cycle of productivity, but not if that perpetual cycle of productivity includes growth as an objective to life. I'll end here. The objective of life is stasis, not permanent growth. The name for permanent growth is cancer. And that is something that we need to look at as a development agenda. Otherwise, everything fixes itself.
Thank you, Bittu, and thank you to my panelists. I think there's a lot of very difficult questions that the panelists have thrown out here, and questions that force us, that compel us to reflect. And I think the title of this seminar is very profoundly sort of borne out by the discussions on how do we rethink businesses. And I think the questions of businesses and their role in ensuring sustainable environments in ensuring the dignity of people, even those who are tribals, who live on mineral-rich parts of the country, even those who may be hungry on the streets. How do we ensure their dignity? And finally, as we look at solutions, as we design solutions for some of the most urgent problems facing not just the planet, but this country as well, who is part of designing those solutions? And I think that has been well debated by this panel in terms of the inclusion of marginal voices, of disempowered voices, of excluded voices. How do we ensure that they are part of designing the solution, not just brought in during the photo op that shows that there is community participation in the good work that your company is doing? So these are very hard questions, and I can imagine that, you know, we are all very thoughtful, and it's not just the conversation for 60 minutes as we are doing today. And I think Nandita's point is well taken, and I'm throwing it open to the floor here, to all our friends from Mumbai and elsewhere, is that perhaps we do need platforms for continued conversations like this. And I hope that all of us can come together for more dialogue, as Dr. Bang has very well explained. So I know that we are meant to have a question and answer session, but I also know that this part of the agenda is actually about having participation from all of you who've been listening so far. So I'm going to actually close this panel. I would like everyone to give a big hand to my very thoughtful panelists for their excellent comments. Very inspiring. Thank you all very much.
Ms. Alstead, if I can invite you again to present our tokens of appreciation to the panelists. So please join us with a round of applause for the panelists. Dr. Nandita Shah from Akshara, Mumbai. Dr. Anand Bang, Health Advisor to the CM of Maharashtra. Mr. Bittu Sahgal from Sanctuary Nature Foundation. Ms. Rajni Bakshi, freelance journalist and author. Mr. Ashish Kumar Singh, Principal Secretary, Transport and Ports Department, Government of Maharashtra. We also thank Jashodhara for moderating the discussion. I would now like to invite, so right after this quick photo. Okay, thank you very much. Please join me in welcoming Ms. Priya Naik, founder and CEO of Samhita Social Ventures, to moderate the open forum. Thank you.
Okay, thank you all. When we thought about putting together this session, as you can see, there are 4 partners there. And so everything we do, we actually collaborate and we would like to co-create. I wanted to sort of use the next 20 minutes to have 2 sets of conversations. One is if each of you could talk to people on your table, talk about the work that you're doing to further SDGs within your own organization or within the stakeholder community that you work with, but also talk about gives and gets. So if you're an organization that's really further along in terms of embedding SDGs within your work, this is an excellent opportunity to share lessons and best practices. If you're an organization that is looking for support to implement your SDG journey sort of more effectively, then please ask people on your table if they have any ideas to help. And at the end of 15 minutes, if one person from each table can very quickly summarize the conversation, but if there are specific opportunities for individuals or organizations in this room to really take this conversation further, please let us know. So for example, if there is an intermediary who's able to help somebody measure their sustainability journey better, please talk about it. If there's a corporate here, I think, Catherine, for example, you talked about the fact that you guys are really pushing the agenda, but you're looking for support in terms of ensuring that your value chain has better quality standards that you're expecting from them. You know, that's something that we want corporates to articulate, to say that we are attempting to do our bit, but we need support from the larger ecosystem. If you are NGOs who are working on some sort of, sort of sustainability issues and require support from corporates or government and media, please make that ask. Is that clear? Any questions? Okay. My colleagues will be circulating around, and we'll try and have at least one person on each table to help you with this conversation. So 15 minutes to talk to each other on the table, and maybe 3 minutes per table to quickly summarize what has been discussed, and if there are concrete gives and gets, we'd love to hear them. Okay, time begins now. We could have one person from every table just talk about gives and gets. Is that all right? Okay, this table, do you guys want to begin?
Hello everyone. I would like to summarize some of the points that we discussed during our conversation.
Hey, sorry, I'm just requesting all of you to pause for a few minutes, and it would be great if you could listen to what each of the tables have to say. And you can continue your conversation in another 15 minutes.
I would like to summarize some of the points that we discussed during our conversation over here. So our panel comprises of people who are firm believers that development, how it's viewed currently, is a bit flawed, and the way we view development should be changed. The current system of viewing development through GDP does not take environment into consideration, and we cannot get into a separate index to measure that, but include environmental growth in GDP calculation. Now, how we do that is up to us to find out and do that. Your ethics went hand in hand, and currently economics and ethics is viewed separately. So to get that together is something we all should strive to do. Thirdly, talking about integrating gender equality in all of the SDGs was something which ma'am pointed out. So that's something we wanted to bring out. And
If may just add,
I may just add, I think he's got terrorized. No, just a minute. I think the point that we wanted to stress, apart from the integration of gender in all avenues, including finance, right? And getting out of the... Okay, fine. Okay, one second. I think SDGs is all about values. Just one statement. SDGs is about values, and SDGs, this global consensus, is trying to supply from the outside values of equity and values of inclusion to governments. Now, governments, while they have ratified the treaties, they are all steeped in the neoliberal paradigm. So to ask those who are implementing the SDGs to cultivate these qualities and integrate them across SDGs is going to be a hugely difficult task.
Okay, sorry, I'm going to be a bit of a Nazi. What I really want are solutions emerging from the table. So really to focus on two things: what you can give to the rest of the audience, what you want to get from the rest of the audience. Because the hope is that you will leave the room today, not just having learned and heard all of the perspectives, but hopefully finding some partners who you can work with in your SDG journey. Okay, with that, this table.
Hi, this table was not the easiest table, shall we say, but it was interesting because we had a lot of corporates, companies, as well as not-for-profits, who had a lot to discuss around livelihood issues, as well as looking at people's participation. One of the issues was the ownership of SDGs themselves, and where does that sit, and there is a need for clarity around that. The corporates also felt the regulatory authorities are not giving us clear policy frameworks. We are looking for that. We're looking for transparency. We're looking for ways to be accountable, because it doesn't seem to be pulling that piece together. As the not-for-profits, we also asked, where is it that the corporates sit? Are they sitting in the designing of the solutions? Are they looking at listening to the solutions coming from the people? So there seems to be a disjunct. Definitely the not-for-profits are looking for more inclusion of the people's voices in the designing, and the corporates, I think, are still struggling with where they will sit in listening to the design. But there is openness around that, and we do expect that dialogue to happen. The third thing we also wanted to talk about, we did talk about, a touch upon, was the cohesion in the SDGs themselves, because sometimes it feels as if there's an hierarchy of the SDGs, and which is not true, because there is an intersectional piece that is missing from the conversation, and we need to understand that SDGs are not, okay, we do 2, 3, and 15, and you do 4, 2, and 1, and how do we kind of look at the holistic and the more cohesive approach towards that. So that's our expectation. Done.
Okay, great. Next table. And if you could keep it down to 2 minutes.
Sure. Hi, everybody. So our table was dominated by non-profits. Only one corporate was there. So the non-profits were just asking for funds, that please give us more money so that, we can implement and be more sustainable. So it was like a clear thing.
I love the honesty in that table.
Yes, that was
very straightforward.
The most honest table, I would say. And the whole idea, then we boiled down to our discussion, was that okay, whatever funds go, but there has to be return on investment, because whatever money the corporate invests in sustainability development, they need some returns, and vice versa for the non-profits also, that whatever money they collect, they have to be, spending it and saving it for their sustainability also. So the whole discussion was basically revolving around, more, accountability and more cohesiveness, where we all work together towards sustainability development.
Okay, great. This table? Does this table have a speaker?
Okay, our table is dominated by the companies which you always look at, the most polluting companies or something. Polluting companies. So, chemical, oil and natural gas, the
transport,
finance. Yes, and again we have a financer also who are ready to finance all the technologies. So yeah, basically what we talked about is what are the technologies being in the opposite side, where people always point fingers. What are the technologies which we use which are more cleaner and more friendly, environment friendly, and how we can go out and propagate about these technologies, where people understand this technology and use these technologies for a better future. So that's the kind of a general
And do you have
output.
an ask from the rest of the audience?
Sorry?
Do you have an ask
Ask is that we are ready to offer. We want people to come and take the technology from us.
Okay, sounds good. Ajeshwari?
Okay, so I became the obvious speaker for this group, because in this group there was everybody who was in the game of corporates except me, who wears the hat of a UN agency working in Maharashtra. So we discussed many things, but we came out with two. The basic philosophy of SDG being people, planet and peace was converted into people, planet and profit, and said that we are ready to plow back profits into the planet, but we need to have somebody to provide an enabling environment. We have certain asks, means we have certain rigidities in terms of which areas we support. But if we were to sit across a table and have somebody convene us, we would probably have the best competitive advantage of what we can offer in a more meaningful way and in a packaged version whose outreach and therefore is more effective and more impactful. So I wanted to conclude with these were the 2 points, but also to inform by way of information that since there are a lot of corporates sitting out here, the additional Chief Secretary of the Department of Education is going to have a round table of potential donors from the corporate sector who would like to support education initiatives and help her, that is the Department of Education. So it will happen on the 3rd of June at the National Stock Exchange. So it's just information as well for those of you who would like to be, it's an open invite.
Sure, we can send details of that to everyone who's here. This is the largest table. And do you have somebody who's going to speak for?
Yeah, largest, but then suddenly it became largest. We were the smallest actually. So thanks to Priya. So we are a very, very diverse team over here actually. Both of, we are from Asian Paints and Shapoorji Pallonji, both of us, both the companies represent corporate sector here. We also have social activist who's an advocate and works for adolescent girl child. She had very important points to make. We also have NGO UA with us and IDR, which is more of an NGO definitely, but then they really request everybody here to share everybody's learnings with them so that they can democratically share everyone's learning with everyone. So I feel it's all about consumption when we sit here and talk about business, planet is growing, we are consuming, business is doing business, we are consuming, everything is consumption over here. And when we are talking about business here, there were 2 takeaways, very important takeaways, especially from Asian Paints. It came that we should have a centralized policy which can be driven by government. I don't believe in it really, but then yes, it came out very strongly on this table. The second very important point that came out on this table was doing business ethically. A very, very important example which advocate, the social activist sitting over here gave us was selling of ultrasound machines by corporates to medical practitioners, which are using these ultrasound machines to test the sex of the child before he or she is born, and then letting the people know. That's something very ethical.
And gets.
Done. So 2 things, ethical business and responsible consumption are the 2 points I would say.
Okay, thank you very much. So the whole intention of bringing all of you together was really to, are you guys also going to, oh, I thought you were, I apologize, I thought this table was going to pass, but please go ahead.
You can apologize. So we had a bit of a different discussion around this table because we discussed the second panel in the sense that as a group, we felt that second panel was a bit harsh on themselves.
Was a bit?
Harsh on themselves, self-critical in the sense that, there was a bit of lacking of passion and that we've kind of lost track a little bit of where we are and in terms of what to do and how to get involved. Whereas I think, and as Norwegians, like I said, I've been here 2 years now, and I don't think I've seen anywhere with such an engagement when it comes to kind of social activities. I asked my team what they've done on a weekend, if they've been on the beach cleaning or if they've been involved in some sort of kind of social activity. Much more than you will ever see. And I think that's something that you guys should actually be quite proud of, and not be too self-critical about it. So, yeah, there's a lot good stuff going on. Maybe we just have to find a better direction for it, or centralize it, or capitalize on it. That was the discussion we had.
I completely agree with you, but we as Indians start collaboration with disagreement. It's a thing we do. So I'm glad that today I think we had very honest perspectives, right? So the fact that the first panel had a set of companies who clearly are polluting but weren't defensive about it, but the fact that they had embraced it and they were proactively sort of ahead of the curve in terms of thinking about what they can do better, which I thought was excellent. So what I'm hearing from all of you is really there is a need for greater dialogue, but there's also a need for concrete frameworks that allow you to not just talk to each other, but work with each other in a way that you are really keeping your context in mind, you're bringing your strengths to the table. I don't know whether Dr. Bang said this when he was here, but Dr. Bang always talks about how the government has the scale, the private sector has the skill, and really the civil society has the relationships with communities and the ability to bring those voices to the table and keep them engaged as one sort of co-creates these solutions. So with that, I want to thank you very much. I also want to just turn over the mic to you, and then we will do kind of a next steps.
So let's thank Priya with a round of applause for the fabulous facilitation of the discussion. So for the session on the way forward, I invite to the podium Dr. Dan Manik, Ms. Priya Naik, Dr. Monica Banerjee from NFI, and Mr. Henrik Wishing from the Royal Norwegian Consulate General. If you could just give... oh, okay, sorry. So Kaja from University of Oslo.
Thank you all very much. My name is Kaja. I'm representing the Oslo SDG initiative at the Center for Development and the Environment at the University of Oslo. We are one of the co-organizers here today. It's been a pleasure to hear the discussions, and we at the Oslo SDG initiative, one of our main aims is to bridge the gap between policy and research. And our focus areas within the Sustainable Development Goals realm has been government policies aligning with the SDGs, but also corporate engagement and the role of business. So mainly we've been doing work on CSR and the SDGs in Africa and in China, but we look forward to further engaging with Indian corporations and building on the relationships that we've built here today. I would like to thank our partners, especially the Consulate General of Norway in Mumbai, the Consul General Ann, Henrik, who's been excellent in facilitating this. We'd also like to thank National Foundation for India and Samhita. And we look forward to following up discussions during dinner tonight and also at future events. Thank you.
Priya, if you could also share a few words.
Thank you, Kaja. So by the way, all of this came together in the last few weeks, so really I think it's been a tremendous experience working with all of you. I just want to take a few minutes to talk about what we do at Samhita and why we're so committed to the SDGs. So Samhita in Sanskrit means collective good, and both those words are extremely important to us. Collective because it takes collective action to solve problems that are as complex as the ones that we live with on a day-to-day basis. And good because it's important that each individual in each organization that we work with sees a clear value proposition for why they're engaging with that particular problem. So we at Samhita do three things. We manage manage/influence a few hundred crores of corporate CSR budgets. And in the last 3 years, we've seen our corporates go from being check writers, really focused on compliance, to thinking more strategically about CSR and sustainability, to now realizing that we need to be catalytic in the way we approach problems, and that it can't be done alone. It really takes a village, right, to sort of do this collectively. The second thing that we do is we are co-creating multi-stakeholder stakeholder platforms. I'll give a few very quick examples. We work with the government of Maharashtra, and while the government has constructed these millions of toilets, what we heard from the government was really kind of an openness to say, can we get companies here to help with 3 or 4 key things that the government doesn't necessarily have the expertise to do. So the first one was behavior change, and we brought in Viacom as the media for social change partner, really leveraging the creative energy, but also just the access that Viacom has to the masses to instill that behavior change. The second one was really the lack of financing of the entire sanitation value chain, and so we have RBL Bank that's looking at sustainable livelihoods and figuring out how to unlock priority sector lending budgets for sanitation. Waste management was another key issue, and we're talking to several companies to address that. So really an example of saying that the government has its strengths, but it also has the humility to say, here are key opportunities where corporates can make a real difference. The one lesson that we've learned is that while the collective impact is important for all of us, the ability to work with each individual and ensure that they feel they have a business connect, they have a stakeholder connect, they have a clear value proposition for why they're there, a give and a get, is really critical to build those partnerships. I very briefly want to talk about a gender platform that we are co-creating with several organizations. We realized fairly early that a lot of the work that we do as civil society or corporates, the way we look at gender is education, skills, financing, but we don't pay attention to this girl as she goes through the most critical moments of her life. So we're really doing 4 things. One is designing programs around the girl. The second is connecting the dots. So if a girl is about to drop out of high school, can we get the high school to collaborate with folks that offer her education counseling and access to scholarships, vocational skills and access to jobs, entrepreneurship training and access to entrepreneurial opportunities. And everyone benefits. The girl benefits because she now has pathways. The school benefits because they're offering services that are critical to their students. All of the service providers benefit. Right? So thinking deeply and clearly about how do we bring these different stakeholders around the table. The third thing is also working with corporates to embed gender into everything that they do. So creating the value proposition for looking at this girl as a customer, a potential employee, somebody who's part of the CSR agenda, and really creating that value proposition. And the last thing that we do is really hold convenings like these. It is important for us to have different voices around the table, but also to create these clear pathways for how each of us can work together. With that, thank you very much for being a wonderful audience. I hope that this session was useful for you and that you leave the room finding a set of partners who you can work with in your SDG journey.
Monica.
So as one of the co-organizers, National Foundation for India, as the notebook that you would see on your tables, it stands for promoting social justice. And how do we do that? By strengthening civil society and shaping philanthropy on governance and inclusion. So we have a very reimagined NFI that, along with making grants to the civil society organizations in about 20 states of this country, is also now trying to influence philanthropy towards social justice. And that is what also brings us to this round table as a part of many other round tables in various parts of the country. Thanks, Radhika. I just thought that as takeaways, particularly for me, out of this round table, is, so we are talking about SDGs and business. It's all about rethinking business for 2030. And I thought that we had 2 panels this afternoon, not necessarily as interface. One panel concentrated on the business, with the business, while the other had all the other pillars, that of media, that of civil society, that of academia, and also the government. But I would like to thank Priya to kind of towards the end, when she brought all of you together, that in real sense was an interface, and also helped us really draw some important lessons or takeaways. And I think that would form the essence of how are we going to look ahead in terms of SDGs and in terms of what businesses could do for SDGs. For me particularly, this is all about complementarity. I think it's not about business versus the other stakeholders. It is basically business and all other pillars. The pillars of media, civil society, government, academia, and businesses to carry forward the whole goals, all the goals under SDGs. And how do we do that is what is going to make SDGs successful, the implementation successful. It's also about, when we say complementary approaches, I think the stories that we heard this afternoon, whether it was weaved around electric cars or waste management or solar energy, this essentially these were reflective of the way the companies are thinking, corporate world is thinking, and also how are you acting upon it. So in a way, it actually gives away the honesty, the challenges that corporate India is facing, and also the new reality in terms of what is going to happen in the near future. So SDGs, of course, present that framework. I think the issues are all same, but SDGs, if they present a framework to us, it also, to my mind, is a very aspirational framework. Now, how do we act around those aspirations is what is going to make a win-win situation for all of us. And in kind of enacting those aspirations around SDGs, I think media, civil society, businesses, academia, and the government all have to work together. Now, there are three things that comes to my mind, is that in order to achieve this, number one, we don't look at just specific goals, but the entire framework. Because when we look at the framework in its entirety, then only are we able to realize or approach innovations. And innovations, as someone in the panel pointed out, it's not about your smartphone innovations, but innovations, those already exist in one part and needs to be taken to another part. It may be existing in our mind, and it existed in terms of the indigenous technical knowledge in one place, and it probably has to be taken to another place. So innovations that are working in one place and could be taken to another. So it's all about that. And in fact, what was hopeful is the way corporate India also is building a great momentum with the way it communicates. So communication, what we saw in terms of those adverts, is really something that's one part of innovation. So that's one. And the second is accountability. It's all about transparency. It's all about communicating with honesty, with humility. It's all about how do we have a mutual ownership around things. And the third point is that about shared responsibility. It's not only about how to make government accountable, it's not about how to make corporates accountable, but it's also about how do we look at ourselves. When civil society is talking about realizing SDGs or making philanthropy learn about it, or making corporates get oriented about it, it's all the more important that how civil society itself is gearing towards new changes. So that's, yeah. So I wrap it here. So next time, it's just to end with by saying that next time when we meet again, it's important that how do we come about sharing new models, and also about discussing how we have worked towards that. It's also very important to discuss our failures, our challenges. So it's while we discuss the new models, it's also important to share our failures with each another. On that note, thank you.
Thank you. Can I now invite Henrik to deliver the vote of thanks, please?
Okay, so thank you everyone for being here and interacting with us today. The CG has been, or the Consulate General has been very happy to assist in the organizing of this event. And we're now going forward with the dinner, and we hope as many as possible will be able to join us for that. So the practical information, that's what we need now. We need to get out of here because we're already over time. There will be a bus waiting for us downstairs. So I would please ask everyone to just move down to the bus and continue your networking and conversations either in the bus or in the residence. There will be another event happening here in 1 hour. So basically get out, yes. If you need the address for the dinner, just please come to me and I'll assist you. Thank you so much.